Today, our 47-minute webinar is going to revolve around the Donor Advised Fund, and we have Kristin Hammett here. I met Kristin at the Outcomes Conference, Christian Leadership Alliance, CLA put that on, and that was, I don't know, a couple of years ago. And I think maybe it was in Florida. Were you at the one in Florida? Is that where we first met? There's been a few since then.
I don't know, Florida or Louisville, one or the other. Yeah, I think it was Florida.
Yeah. Anyways, it's funny because we're both from Kansas City. We met initially in Florida, and then it's like, oh, we live in the same county. And we've continued to catch up out of state or in state. But Kristin works for the Signatory. She'll be sharing more about that today, so I won't go into there. But Kristin's just a great human being, wonderful person. She's a wife. She's a mother of 3. I was getting a little bit of parenting advice already this morning before the webinar started. And she said, hey, let's keep it conversational. And if you know Kent and I, our fundraising philosophy is all around conversation. So we said, that's great. Let's do it. Here's where we're going today. We're going to be talking about donor advised funds. We will have some Q&R. So if you have some questions that you want to throw out to Kristin or Kent or myself, feel free to be thinking of those. We'll open up the chat box in a little bit. And we would also love to hear what your top takeaway is today as well. So if something really resonates with you, make a mental note of that. We like to share that. And then we have some other announcements that we have coming up. But just to get us started, I'm going to throw this first question to Kristin. What is a donor advised fund? And then we'll continue that conversation and keep it going.
Awesome. So before I answer that question, let me give a quick introduction about what the Signatory is. And that will parlay into what a donor advised fund is. So the Signatory is a global Christian foundation and a donor advised fund sponsor. Our objective, our vision is really to write the last check to solve the world's greatest problems. We are one of over 1,000 donor advised sponsors in the space today, which then leads you likely to wonder what really is this donor advised fund, or DAF, that we talk about. So a donor advised fund, real simply, is a charitable giving account. That's not the language the Signatory likes to use. We like to look at it as a tool for generosity. But when you get down to it, when you talk about the technical aspects of it, it really is a charitable giving account. So if you think about a checking account, a donor advised fund is very much the same idea, but it's all charitable giving. So when a donation or contribution is made into that fund, it can only be given out for charitable purposes, which is good news for you because you're leading nonprofits. And that means that those dollars have to go for charitable purposes to a nonprofit. So that is the kind of overview of a donor advised fund. There are some advantages, certainly, to using that tool. So the donor gets an immediate tax deduction when a gift is made into their donor advised fund. And then they have an opportunity to invest those dollars or go ahead and put them to work, as we would say, and grant them out or make a recommended grant to a nonprofit. So let me pause there and then throw it back to the Stroman crew, and you guys tell me what questions that might come out of that.
I'll start with a more simple question. The account holders of these donor advised funds, are they required to make a certain amount of distribution every year, percentage or dollar amount? How does that work?
It's a great question. The answer is no. They are not required, which is, to be completely transparent, often the criticism that donor advised funds are faced with is that there is no requirement for payout. So I could put $10,000 in my donor advised fund today, get my tax receipt, and not have to do anything with it. There is no requirement. That is not reality of what happens in the marketplace. We actually see, if you compare it with private foundations, they are required to pay out 5%. While a donor advised fund has no minimum requirement, they're actually paying out on average closer to 22% across the landscape of donor advised funds. Now the signatory is closer to 50%. So we have a significantly higher payout rate. But as we're thinking about, because I know we've got a mix of both faith-based organizations as well as secular, and regardless of where you stand or what place you take up, you have donors likely that both are from a Christian donor advised fund and perhaps a secular. So that overall number is that a donor advised fund pays out more than a private foundation, but there is no requirement. So that's where it really comes down to the way those donor advised sponsors are talking to their donors and talking to their clients about generosity and giving.
Okay. How much in the philanthropic space, how predominant is the donor advised fund amidst all other, foundations, the giving money just in people's bank versus donor advised funds?
Yeah. So it is the donor advised fund is the fastest growing philanthropic tool there is. They have surpassed private foundations, and 22% of all giving happens from a donor advised fund. That is a September 2023 number from Chronicle of Philanthropy. I will share that article with you guys if you want to share that with folks.
Okay.
That is pretty phenomenal number. So it is and I've got all kinds of statistics I can also share on the growth of how much they're growing both by number and dollars in and then dollars out. Sum it up to say this is a tool that you need to understand at least sort of the basics of. And I would encourage you as a nonprofit leader and fundraiser to embrace it because donors are using it. And you could probably Google it today. If you've got a dual screen, you could do it right now and find a host of mixed opinions on whether or not it is a good tool. But the reality is it is a tool that you need to understand and engage with effectively because it does, make up for 22% of all charitable giving in 2021. That's a 2021 number. 2022 numbers should come out here in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, it's a pretty significant portion of the charitable giving.
Nice. I didn't realize it was that predominant.
Yeah. Super fast growing. Yeah. It's impressive how much it's grown. Lots of questions around why maybe that is. I'll tell you kind of a couple of my working theories. First is we are in the middle of the greatest wealth transfer that we will ever see. Likely we've got boomers retiring and passing on or selling businesses. And a donor advised fund is really uniquely positioned to help donors mitigate tax and maximize generosity. And so while we are seeing a significant transfer of assets, there is the greatest opportunity for generosity is amidst that transfer. And so I think we're capturing some of that, certainly not nearly what's available to be captured, but I think that's part of it. It is very versatile, whether you're a business owner or not. It's a way to to liquidate stocks. It's a way to liquidate real estate. If you're talking to a donor who's generously minded and they don't have a donor advised fund, it's wise to mention it as a tool because it increases their opportunity and really expands their capacity for generosity just by having that tool.
Well, Kristin, one of the reasons that we wanted to be in the same room with you and to have this audience hear your voice, you're specialists. I mean, I know this isn't your only area of focus, but I mean, I don't know everybody in the room, but I would guess that certainly for myself, I would say what you know about donor advised funds compared to what I know about donor advised funds is, you're like the ocean and I'm like a thimble. and it's a specialized area. One of the things that the work that Aaron and I do, the real focus or the definition we use for success is helping donors make well-informed decisions. And so, I think people can argue about whether there should be donor advised funds or not. That's not our topic today. They exist, they're prominent. But to a large degree, you've got a room full of people here who are tasked with helping to bring resources to a mission. What advice would you have for us as fundraisers? What are some opportunities or maybe some mistakes as they relate to donor advised funds? What guidance might you offer?
Yeah, so let me maybe make one point of clarity. I appreciate the opportunity to share some advice. Here's one maybe similarity or maybe an analogy or metaphor that could help folks. And that is that a donor advised fund sponsor is the sponsoring organization that holds those resources, but they are not the ones making the grant recommendations. Those grant recommendations are coming from individual donors. So think of it as a checking account or a bank. If you are a retail outlet, call it, Walmart, Target, Kohl's, whatever, pick your retail outlet of choice. To increase your sales, you don't go to Commerce Bank or Bank of America to try to advocate for your product, right? Or your retail outlet. You work with the consumers. So it's very similar in the donor advised fund space. You advocating and getting to know me as a donor advised fund sponsor employee doesn't really help advocate for the work that you do. You do that by getting in front of the consumer, or in this case, donor, right? So I think what I want you to understand, if nothing else, when you walk away from this conversation today, is that your chief role is to engage donors and steward them well. The way they give comes secondary to the relationship. So the donor advised fund is a tool by which they can give. If they're not giving that way and they don't know about it, certainly there's an opportunity to share. But the chief goal is for you to develop a relationship with that individual donor. And then the donor advised fund part kind of comes afterwards. Now, the one difference I would say to that is if you have a donor today who's giving to you through a donor advised fund, I don't care if it's Vanguard, Schwab, the Signatory, National Christian Foundation, Truman Heartland Community Foundation, you name it, fill in the blank with the foundation or the organization. If they're giving to you that way and they are not already on your mid or major list, put them there. They deserve some individual attention. They are strategic in their generosity, they're intentional in their giving, and there is clearly some kind of capacity there for them to be able to give. Now, the average donor advised fund, I think, holds close to $200,000. I'm not sure that's super reflective of, your individual markets. I think that is significantly inflated with the charitable or the Fidelity Charitables of the world. But regardless, whether it's $5,000 or $500,000 sitting in that donor advised fund, they have capacity to give. And so as you can engage them more as a mid or major donor, even if they're just giving to you monthly today, it's worth the time to get to know them and see where you fall in their kind of hierarchy of interest and how you might be able to engage with them more significantly. Does that answer your question, Ken?
Oh yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Love the focus on relationship too. So I think that's relationships always win. Jane asked a really good question that I was going to bring up later, but she already dropped it in the chat box. But just to build our knowledge around donor advised funds, she asked, what is your minimum dollar amount to open a donor advised fund?
Yeah, great question. So that varies from donor advised fund sponsor to donor advised fund sponsor. So there's typically a minimum balance, a minimum to open, and then a fee on assets under management. The signatory is unique and an outlier in the space, and that we have none of those. So we do not have a minimum balance, we do not have a minimum to open, and we do not charge a fee on assets under management. So the good news is we're very accessible. We also are a Christian donor advised fund, and so we don't grant everywhere to everything. And all of those have to be approved through us, but broadly, we are still very accessible. So I can't answer that question, Aaron, specifically, because it really would depend on each donor advised fund, that sponsor relationship, but that's easily accessible on each of their websites. If you go to Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard, those are numbers that are out there and easy to be accessed.
But it'd be safe to assume you don't have to have $100 million to open a donor advised fund. You can.
Yep, absolutely. Typically an everyday donor is not. Some of those friction points or minimums and fees make it at least worth pause to say, does this make sense? Which is also why perhaps those folks are kind of self-selecting out of this tool. This is generally a tool for that mid-level donor and up, somebody who wants to be super strategic in their giving, and really is committed to generosity. But that's not to say that some folks, who are on more of a general giving level don't also use the tool. You can still give recurring gifts and set up all of those kinds of grants through a donor advised fund.
And part of the strategy, or I don't know, strategy benefit there, Brent brought up the question, or just made a statement, didn't know you can invest those funds. So when a donor puts money into donor advised funds, the money doesn't just have to sit there. It can be invested and it can grow. So there's more to give. Is that?
Yes, but that's the key, more to give. So and if you think about it, so the key donor advised fund sponsors in the space, Fidelity Charitable is the biggest, Vanguard and Schwab. What is their main line of business? Investment.
Banking.
Yes, they do investments as their chief source of revenue. So if you think about it, that's kind of how these tools kind of got started. Now, yes, Aaron, to your point, they can be invested, but all earnings are also still charitable. So don't think this is like invest, or you're going to put $10,000 in, let it grow, then you get to pull out the interest. Those all still roll over and get to just grow your capacity for giving, right. Really.
And you can correct this statement, but I would encourage everyone, as you have relationships with donors and just people in the community, if there, as Kristin was saying, if there is a sale of business or a big financial transaction happening like that, I was sitting in, I think it was a workshop that you were leading, and just looking at the numbers and how much more people can give if there's just a lot of, you can basically choose to give your money to nonprofits or give it to the government. And there's some opportunity that donor advised funds offer that most people don't even know about. And again, Kent and I aren't the experts on the donor advised funds, but if you at least would encourage your people to have a conversation with the signatory and just get some information, man, the potential there is so huge. It's almost mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And,
so just to put some numbers around that, 90% of all America's wealth is in assets outside of cash. 10% lies in cash, liquid assets. Do you know where 80% of all charitable giving comes from? That 10% cash. So clearly we are missing this huge opportunity, and that's what donor advised funds are positioned to help you as a nonprofit leader and your donors to tap into. If they own real estate, if they own farmland, if they own a business, if they own oil and gas interests, stocks, privately held business, all of those are eligible for generous purposes. And a donor advised fund is still the tool by which they can liquidate those gifts or those assets into gifts. And it's just a key, thanks Aaron for that plug. It's just a key opportunity to share with those really highly valued donors. Here's the other bonus for you relationally. When you bring up things like that, you endear yourself to that donor and you become more of a consultant and less of a, salesperson, so to speak. And I don't like to use that word in giving because I know that's not how I look at you, any of you at all. But it changes the way your donors look at you. You become someone who's an advisor and a consultant for them rather than someone who's just there to give an update and ask for money. So it is important. Feel free to look at our website, drop me an email. I'm sure Aaron can share that information with you. But I would love to equip you with some resources. And really the key piece is you don't have to be an expert. You just need to know to bring it up in conversation and then say, I'm not the expert in this, but I'm really glad you asked. And I want to, share more information with you. Keep in mind, we don't charge fees. So there is no, there's not going to be a rub or a friction point for you referring anybody to us. We really just want to come alongside you and be your helper in managing and stewarding that relationship well.
Can you tell the Reader's Digest version of the story of, I think it was the founder of the Signatory, why he started it?
No, so it wasn't the founder, but close. Current CEO is Steve French. He is a former business owner, and high level story is he actually had bought and sold a couple of different businesses over time. And in January of 16, exited his business with, as he would say, all the right advisors in the room, right? So you've got your tax accountant and all the attorneys and the financial advisors. Every I was dotted and T was crossed. And he wrote the largest check of his life to the IRS. And a few short months later, he learned about the Signatory and the work that we do, did some calculations, and realized if he had known that he could have given a portion of his business prior to the sale, he could have redirected, wait for it, $1.8 million from tax to giving. If you can imagine what it would feel like to lay your head on a pillow at night and think, that's nearly $2 million. I'm not going to get to keep it anyway, but I could have given it to my church, my local food pantry, my local pregnancy center, my local, fill in the blank. It's pretty significant. That's what we want to help your donors avoid, is that remorse or regret of, why didn't I know? How come someone didn't tell me? You can be the person who helps share that.
Yeah, and so that educational role is one that I think a lot of times as fundraisers we overlook or maybe downplay. But being the educator, we don't have to be the expert, right? But Kristin, it's like you were saying, to know that these things exist. Don't sell the stock and give us the money.
Right.
Give the stock. And so, I don't have to be a stockbroker to share that idea.
That's right.
And one of the things you just touched on is the idea of making the charitable gift before the liquidation or whatever that financial event is. Any other suggestions you would have along those lines of how we might educate in the process of stewarding those who we have relationships with?
So this is a little bit outside of the donor advised fund space, but I would say in general, and there's statistics to kind of back this up, but anytime you bring up assets outside of cash, so, some of you might in your current organization be equipped to accept stock gift without the assistance of any donor advised fund sponsor, which is great. Start talking about it. You think your donors know about things that we kind of make assumptions a lot of times, right? And maybe they actually do know, but whether or not they're applying that knowledge to their current situation is really sometimes something that you can help to navigate with them. So beginning to bring up any kind of asset gift, or just reminding them of their wealth. Sometimes the statistics I was referring to actually say that the donor will give more, even if it's still out of cash, because it changes the psychology of giving for them, helps them think about what they have instead of the finite amount that they might have sitting in their liquid fund, right? So they're no longer thinking about their donation as it relates to the vacation they're planning with their family. They're thinking about it relative to the significant amount of assets that they actually have, whether that's retirement or an inheritance or whatever, is in their mind at the time. So that's super helpful relative to engaging with the relationship. Here's the other piece, and I don't think very many people talk about this. Put aside the ministry talk or the nonprofit talk, the organization work that you're doing for a minute, and ask them sincerely about their family and about their business, if they're a business owner. So begin to engage with them in some relational kinds of conversations, what you want to hear and listen to. And any of our relationship managers here at the Signatory would tell you how they begin conversations is tell me your story. Now we do it to really learn more about the person and then also look for some generosity opportunities. You can be doing it to listen for pain points, right? Where is this going to intersect with the work that we do? Why might they be really passionate about homeless shelters or rehabilitation work or pregnancy centers or fatherhood programs? Like, what does this look like? I'm looking for some pain points. So where you can put aside your agenda and focus on them, become more donor centric, not only helps you when you're thinking about developing that relationship, but more things begin to reveal themselves. You'll pick up on hints relative to where some assets and additional generosity capacity exists.
So really what you're talking about is being interested in people.
Yeah. Good
place to start, right?
It's a really good place to start. That's right. Well, and here's the thing. And so I'm going to give you this in Christian language. If that's not where you find yourself, you can adapt it to fit your own philosophy. But here's my personal perspective is that when you are fundraising for an organization, you are the connection point between God's resources and his work. So in a secular perspective, a person's passion and the organization that is getting the work done. Like that's a pretty amazing place to be. So if you can begin to focus on the person and where their passion is and where their pain points are, and then connect them in with the work that you're doing that matches with that, that's pretty great. Here's the caveat. Sometimes there's not going to be a match. And so then you get this great opportunity to say, I know like 3 organizations who are doing work that it sounds like you would be super interested in. So I know that's probably pushing some hot buttons there with folks like, oh, I can't let go of that donor. But it really serves them well. And I believe that if you do that and you're honest with yourself and that donor, that you will reap the benefits.
Yeah. Well, and you've just touched kind of a nerve for me. For whatever reason, I always light up when I hear people talk about my donors. I think that's bad language. It's a bad mindset, and it doesn't exist. But if we talk about, the donors that I serve, that's a whole different thing than somebody that I possess. And, that stuff bleeds through. And I think on a good day, a best day, we're, again, serving the needs of the donors, and we don't get to decide for them. So if their philanthropy is shaped differently than our mission, one of the best things we can do is to not pursue or receive a gift that's best served someplace else.
This is about the time that we see about half of these screens like turn off and they're like, oh, done. I'm just teasing. Thanks for hanging in there with us, guys.
Yeah.
I know some of those could be easy for us to say when we're not the ones looking at that budget number, but I believe that to be very much the truth. And if you will just be focused on stewarding that relationship well, whether that means making a significant ask or connecting them with another organization, I think that will serve you and them well.
Kristin, I had a quick question. I have, through our ministry, Christian ministry, Shepherd's Fold Ministries, has received multiple checks from the Signatory through the years. Are you saying that I can tell donors now that if they have a non-cash gift, they can give it to Shepherd's Fold through the Signatory, such that I don't have to go set up an account for stocks to sell, or I can just go through you if they choose to, that if
Yeah.
the donor will be willing to set up their connection with you. Is that right?
Yeah. So actually anything that the Signatory is doing and does and touts and talks about is something that every donor advised fund sponsor is equipped to do. I'm not saying they all do it. It's not necessarily their niche, their specialty, their expertise. To be completely frank, we have a legal team that they spend hours and hours and hours doing this work. I mean, there's a lot of due diligence, but the quick answer is that yes, and it's really most wise, both for you and the donor, to do that liquidation through a donor advised fund and not through the charity or nonprofit. You don't want that liability or potential tax implication. We have a team of experts who does it every day. So they are making sure that both the donor and any organization that receives a gift out of that donor advised fund are protected in that way.
Great point. Great question, Brent, and thanks for such a clear answer, Kristin.
Yeah.
Well, and I got a text, and then I've seen a few chats come through. I think they're a group. I had one direct come through, but kind of a two-part question. How do we know if a donor has a donor advised fund? And then the second part I would ask is, do we even need to know that they're utilizing the donor advised fund?
It's a great question. So let's start with the second one first. And I'm not always really good at remembering two parts, so you might have to tell me the first part after I get done with the second part. But do you even need to know? Well, I would say in part, no, because you're serving the donor, not the DAF sponsor, right? So being donor centric is important. So if they're it's just like, it doesn't matter if I am writing a check to Target, whether or not I'm giving my account is at Commerce Bank or if it's at Bank of America, right? That is not an important point. However, it is important for you if they are giving through a donor advised fund and you already are not developing some kind of tailored communication or relationship with them. And that's kind of what I was referring to at the beginning about the mid and majors. This is a donor who, if they're not on your radar screen right now, and they're giving to you, $100 a month out of their donor advised fund, but they're not hitting your radar as a major donor, that I would encourage you to just reevaluate that. Put them on a list, go take them out to coffee, connect with them, and try to learn more about them to qualify them for any kind of major donor relationship or mid-level donor relationship, because they're using a DAF. They're kind of signaling to you, I'm serious about giving. I'm serious about my generosity. I'm strategic and I'm thoughtful. That's a donor that is worth a coffee meeting every day of the week. And I would encourage you to at least take that first step to try to get to know them better. Now, Aaron, what was the first question?
I forgot. No, it was how would we know if a donor is utilizing a donor advised fund?
So, I mean, it brings up a good point, right? I would say the logical answer is because they're sending you a gift through their donor advised fund. And it generally, at least at the Signatory, would say the Signatory, and then it would name the fund name that it's coming from, unless it's anonymous. Now, that's another criticism that donor advised funds get sometimes. It's actually only about 3 to 5% of all giving from a donor advised fund that is actually anonymous. So most of those donors are fine with you knowing about them and want to develop that relationship with you. So you'll know if you know, because you can look to see how they're giving. If it's possible, though, that they're giving outside of the donor advised fund. So if you have a relationship with a donor and they're not giving through a donor advised fund, you can ask. But I think, and really then that becomes an important conversation as you're thinking about parlaying that in with a non-cash giving conversation, helping them understand about giving stock, giving if they have a business, closely held business, that's something that you might want to bring up. If you know they're strategic about their giving, if they're really a serious donor to you, I would certainly think about bringing that up in conversation. But it's still not about the tool as much as it's about the relationship.
Right. Okay. And I have to, everyone's asking this question. I'm going to ask it so I know how to answer it, because I get this question a lot too. It's probably the $1 million question of the day, but everyone's going to ask how can we get in front of these donor advised fund account holders or create what? I don't even know what you call that person. Donors?
Holder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's
That's a
like
good word.
the account's kind of under the signatory, but
This
Yeah.
is the $1 million question. You're right. This is the question I get every week, multiple times a week, probably. Here's the thing I would say, and I didn't say that's part of my history, but I was a development officer. Like, I get the tension here. If I would have been asking the same question, I would have been calling the donor advised fund sponsors, asking the same thing. How do I get in front of your donors? Here's what my answer. And so just smile, keep smiling into the screen while I say it. You look at your donor pool currently. You don't worry about getting in front of Commerce Bank or Bank of America or, fill in the blank bank. You serve your donors well. You develop relationships with those who already care about the work that you're doing. You don't go fishing in a pool of folks who may or may not have any interest in the work that you do. You begin looking at the folks who are already giving to you or in that sphere of influence of those that are giving to you, and begin there fostering those relationships, looking to see where you can grow, rather than, seeing this like bright, shiny object and thinking that's the answer to all of my problems. It's not. And to be frank, the signatory has given historically to 12,600 different nonprofits, 6,000 this year. So you don't want to be a little fish in a big pond here so much as you need to go focus on really developing relationships with those already giving to you.
okay. So you're not going to give us a list of names, people to.
I'll attach it. You can send it out to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't really share that clearly.
Yeah. No, I think that's good for everyone to hear. And, there's kind of this fantasy, world that we imagine, and Kent and I get it as consultants too. Hey, all these rich people, introduce us to them. And it's like, that's not how it works. But yeah, stewarding those relationships that you have goes so far.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No magic bullet there. That just is the work of the relationship building that you get to do in that fundraising space.
for sure. Well, this has been really rich, and I know we've got a couple things we want to touch on before we wrap up. I've been monitoring the chat box, and I think for the most part, Kristin, you've already answered those questions. Yeah, thanks for raising the questions. Aaron, what else do we need to do before we wrap up today?
Well, yeah, and I was going to say the same thing, that questions have been coming in, so we've kind of just integrated that. But I'm going to throw up here on the screen real quick a little.
I'll throw up on the screen.
I'm going to throw up on the screen. I wonder how many times I've said that and didn't even realize it. I'm going to place on the screen a poll. This is our last 47-minute webinar of the year. We're planning out next year's lineup. What topics would you like to see in 2024, or who would you like to hear from? We do try to have a guest every other month. So if you want to plug in an answer on the screen real quick, we would greatly appreciate that. And I'm going to keep that up there as the answers come in. Is that showing up for everyone? Can I just get a little, yeah, okay. See some heads nodding. And also want to ask everyone, what is your top takeaway? So is there anything that's like, okay, this is my, if I could summarize this, the best takeaway for the webinar today, this is what it is. Feel free to drop that. in the chat box, but we'd love to hear your top takeaway. And again, as you're filling in the poll and filling in the chat box, I'll just mention the Asking Academy 2024 dates have been released. They're going to be at the askingacademy.com. We have a couple different summits scheduled for 2024. And man, just right on par with what we're talking about.
Yeah.
How do you engage in conversational fundraising? And we take teams through the process, and we have just fantastic results. We just finished a summit a couple weeks ago and have had some amazing results. But this idea of being conversational, caring about the relationship more than you care about the gift, we just hit that over and over and over. And if you have a team that needs to grow in their fundraising experience and training, this is what we do for teams, both staff and volunteers. So Asking Academy is open for 2024. If you're interested, you can drop that in the chat box too. If you just type the word Asking Academy, I'll follow up with you and get you some more info. So there's the Asking Academy plug. I forget what the next, the website. They're askingacademy.com. And I'm going to stop the share screen here just so we can wrap things up. But we have a couple minutes left.
Yeah, Aaron. So somebody just put a note. How do you make relationships with somebody so that you can have these conversations? And that's precisely what we equip people to do through the Asking Academy. So if you have relationships that you don't know how to nurture, we can help you with that. If you don't know how to form the relationships, that's areas where we specialize, and happy to serve along the lines, Aaron, of what you just described.
Yeah. And Kristin, you dropped your email address. Is that the best way for us to?
Yeah, I'm going to send some notes over to you, Aaron, to send out to the group if that works. I also sent that slide deck. I think that'll be helpful information just to have as a resource. But then if you guys have additional questions, particularly around the non-cash piece, what a donor advised fund looks like, I would encourage all of you, I probably should have said this earlier before folks started peeling away, open a donor advised fund at the Signatory if you are interested. There is, like I said, no friction point there. It's kind of like one of those, if you do it, then you're going to be more comfortable talking about it. You're going to be more knowledgeable when you share with your donors about this tool, or go open one somewhere else. But I do think that donor advised fund is a great tool to help activate strategic generosity. And when you are doing it, it's just easier and you are more authoritative in your way to be able to speak about it to donors.
Well, and I'll give a personal recommendation for the Signatory. I opened up a donor advised fund, and part of my kids' allowance, their expectation is that they give away money. And so now we put it all we have a little family fund, and we let where we give our money be a family discussion, and using that as teaching children generosity. And it's super easy to do. So I would double down on that.
I'm so happy that you do that. That's exactly what I see happen. So great.
Yeah.
So now you know how to get in front of those owners of those donor advised and come to a 47-minute webinar. It happens right here. So, and hey, with that, it's almost 47. I just want to say, wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Merry Christmas. We're not going to be back in the room together like this until next year, but these conversations have made my year really special. And I want to thank everybody for being a part of that.
So great.
Yes. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in today. Kristin, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
What a gift.
Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. Blessings to everyone on your pursuit and interaction with donor advised fund holders. Wishing you the best, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks again, Kristin.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.